probably one of the best compliments you got was from one of your key competitors. He basically said, we can more than match them in terms of product range, marketing, expenditure, etc., but we just can't match their customer experience. The best thing about Michael is when we work together, Club Super, who he used to manage, achieved NPS increases, 60-point increase in B2C and 80-point increases in B2B. Given your NPS increases, did you see a link between your NPS increases and economic performance metrics such as loyalty, roll-ins, roll-outs, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So part, I guess, of the strategy or the monitoring of the strategy is to try and link, your NPS performance with your business performance.
What were the business challenges you were facing when we met?
You started working with us, Chris. It was around about the time of the global financial crisis. One of Club Super's main competitors was, I think, around about 3 or 4 times the size of Club Super. And the really big industry funds, about 90 times the size of Club Super. So we were doing well, but we didn't know why we were doing well. We were sort of stagnating. We were going neither forward nor backwards.
And NPS is an exercise in organizational transformation. When we see people who treat it like a survey or a score, there's no progress. The one defining factor for Club Super, and the same thing goes for Quick Super as well, was the fact that I presented results at the board meeting, and the recommendations were minuted. Once they were minuted, then you knew it had to happen because it had to be reported against.
We'd spoke to 3 different organisations to help us out. You're one of them. The other 2 had asked us all about our marketing plans and our marketing strategies. You're asking us about our business plan and our environment and our the super industry and our organisation.
What advice would you give a CEO that is just embarking on a program?
Firstly, commit. Don't do it half-hearted. Don't just do the survey, get the results, and then carry on with life as usual. Don't be afraid to get some outside help. From within the organisation, you oftentimes can't see the big picture, and it's an enormous help to have someone from outside the organisation, even outside the industry, to come in and help with whatever you need help with.
I have to tell you, there are some clients that are do-it-yourself type clients, and then there are some clients who literally take us into the tent, right? The ones who take us into the tent, all of them increase their NPS guaranteed.
If you're looking at implementing an NPS type system, embrace it, take it on with enthusiasm, embed it in your organisation as business as usual, and enjoy the ride.
Welcome to Season 2 of Strategy Edge, where we talk to leaders who've achieved amazing results in the area of customer experience or NPS, brand strategy, and employee engagement. And this series is really to put a spotlight on these leaders who have actually achieved these amazing results. And today I'm really proud to share with you that the podcast today is with Michael Corcoran. I've known Michael Corcoran for almost a decade now. And I have to say that the unique thing about Michael Corcoran is he always comes across as this very unassuming, quiet person, but underneath that is like a very dry and witty sense of humor. I met Michael Corcoran when he was the Trustee Services Manager at Club Super, which for people who are outside the superannuation arena is kind of like being the CEO of the place. And the best thing about Michael is when we work together, Club Super, who he used to manage, achieved NPS increases of 60 points with members and 80 points with their organizations or the employers that they worked with. So 60-point increase in B2C and 80-point increases in B2B. And I have to also share with you this. We used to do benchmarking studies for superannuation with only the largest brands. And when we looked at our benchmarking studies of the largest superannuation brands, and then we compare the results to Club Super, where we used to ask similar questions anyway, Club Super actually had, a higher NPS score than the best brand in the market. So, welcome, Michael.
Thanks,
To
Chris.
kick off, especially for our overseas viewers, if you can maybe share, what superannuation is at a very high level, and they may not know what it is, what are the challenges of the category, et cetera, so that they have some idea in terms of what we're talking about.
Yeah, sure. So superannuation, when you pare it back, it's really not a very difficult thing to understand at the high level. It's in Australia, it's a form of compulsory saving for retirement. So
Yeah.
compulsory super came back in the late 80s, it kicked off. Because around about back then, only 40% of Australia's workforce was had retirement savings.
Yeah.
So that worked out way back then that in the future, we're going to have a lot of people retiring and relying on the government pension, which was going to be a
Yeah.
big pull on Australia's resources. So to cut a long story short, the government introduced a scheme where it was mandatory for employers to send a certain percentage of your super off to a superannuation fund. Started off
Hmm.
very low at 5%, phased in, now it's up to around about 11 or 12%. So it's a
Hmm.
form of compulsory retirement savings. It's highly regulated because
Hmm.
it is compulsory super. Um, People really want to make sure that their savings are invested properly and legally. So there are a lot of rules and regulations around super. So
Hmm.
it can be seen as quite complex, but in the end, it's just a mandatory form of retirement savings.
You're
Um,
right.
One of the observations is that because people don't see it, it goes straight from their employer into a super fund. At a young age, especially, you don't have much involvement. You just sort of know that your employer is making contributions for you, and that's about it. And so
Hmm.
people become more aware of it when they get into their 40s and 50s and they can see retirement looming. I guess the compulsory part of super can sometimes make people be a little bit resentful. There's all
Right.
this money here that I can't use to, save for a deposit on a house. So super itself can sometimes have a little bit of a negative rap, but that's the broad outline of the super system in Australia.
Okay. And as part of your superannuation contributions, you can also get protection in terms of income protection and life insurance and disability insurance, correct?
Yeah, you can. So depending on your super fund, but you can get inexpensive death cover, total and permanent disablement, income protection, all that sort of thing. So yeah, that's right. And the other thing is that almost all funds now, probably all funds, give you some sort of choice as to where your savings are invested, whether it's in the
Mhm.
conservative option, the high growth option, shares, all that sort of thing. So
Right.
that's one way of trying to get people involved. You can say to them, look, if you don't make any choice on your super, we're going to invest it here,
Yeah.
but you can invest it in other areas if you want to.
Right. Cool. Cool. Sounds good. So now going back to your role as trustee services manager, what were the business challenges you were facing when we met?
Yeah, so my client, as you mentioned earlier on, was a fund called Club Super.
Hmm.
And it was a fund that was set up mainly to look after people in the club industry. So
Hmm.
most of our members, well, the typical Club Super member was probably around the age of 30 or younger, in between 20 and
You're
30
right.
years old.
Right.
So
Right.
low involvement in super. It was, by industry standards, a pretty small fund. One of Club Super's main competitors was, I think, around about oh, 3 or 4 times the size of Club
Wow.
Super.
Okay.
And the really big industry funds, about 90 times the size of Club Super. You can see the competitors that we and the resources that they had that we didn't.
Right.
So
Right.
our challenge was that we were doing okay. We weren't losing members to better resourced funds,
Uh-huh.
but we weren't exactly shooting the lights out either.
Mm,
So we were doing well, but we didn't know why we were doing well.
mm,
We had people out in the field who gave us informal feedback. We had a call centre who shared
mhm,
their feedback as well. But we were sort of stagnating. We were going neither forward nor backwards. And in that sort of competitive environment, you weren't going to last too much longer. So
mm,
we suspected that we didn't have any specialised marketing staff or
mm,
communication staff. So we suspected that we needed to get better on our marketing and communications, but
mm,
we didn't really know.
mm, mm. Okay, cool. And that's when we met, right? And from memory, I think I was referred to you by someone else.
You were appropriately enough, Chris. So I was looking for an organisation that could help us with marketing.
Yeah.
And so we did the Google search. We found two organisations. But a friend of mine, a colleague of mine over at Sun Super at the time, which is
Yes.
now Australian Retirement Trust,
Yes.
I asked him if he knew anyone. And if Wayne Sullivan is watching this, thank you, Wayne.
Yeah.
He brought your name up. So I gave you a call and in you came.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. So I strongly believe that when it comes to doing programs like this, where you want to engage your members to the next level, the first thing you have to do is crystallize your strategic intentions. And what we actually did, if you remember, is we did a board strategy session, and Shirley, the chairman, was there, other board members were there. We had members from the leadership team, and we had staff, like the CSMs were there as an example. And we had a whole group of people. And when were in that session, we developed, the customer experience strategy, what emotions people should feel after they interact with you, what functional bits they should feel. We developed your value proposition, we developed your positioning tagline, and so on and so forth. What was your impression of that workshop?
Yes, they were great memories, Chris. It was actually the reason, and I was at the time I was very happy with the workshop, and I'll go into what happened back then. But just remembering that earlier on, we'd spoke to three different organisations to help
Yeah,
us out, and you were
yeah.
one of them. The other two had asked us all about our marketing plans and our marketing strategies and all that sort of thing, which was fine, which
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
shared fully with them. You were asking us about, I think you may have mentioned marketing, I'm not sure, but you were asking us about our business plan and
Yeah,
our environment and our the super industry and our organisation,
yeah.
the mob that I work for, IFAA. And so that said to me that you were seeing our issue as a much more bigger picture issue than just the marketing.
Hmm.
So that led to the workshop, and the workshop was a lot of fun actually, because as you said, we had I think we had most of the board of directors there, all the ones
Yeah,
that were available anyway.
yes,
We had, as you said, our client services managers, a team of
yes.
three. We also had management from within the IFAA. We had one or two of the call centre staff,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it was a big party, but it meant that we had input from all aspects,
Yes.
not just one particular aspect.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing was that it made us think about Club Super from perspectives that we hadn't thought about it
Mm.
before. And so it was a bit of well, it was a lot of a sort of a refresh. Club Super had been going along, as I said before, going pretty well,
Mm.
but we were, and I don't think we realised it fully until we hit this workshop. We were
Mm.
in need of a rebrand, and the
Yeah.
time that Chris that you started working with us, Chris, it was around about the time of the global financial crisis,
Yes.
just a little bit
Yes.
after. And
Yeah.
our tagline at the time was "Club Super growing with you."
Right.
And when our funds were actually going back by about 30%. So that became a little bit of an ironic tagline. So, yeah, but I think the thing that I remember about it was that it was enjoyable. And
Yes.
it was, there were a lot of opinions coming in from a lot of different areas, and no one was afraid to express an opinion. So,
Yes, absolutely. So I'll tell you a few anecdotes from that workshop because it was a lot of fun. The first thing was Ben, as someone with the nicest possible heart, beautiful person. The We did the workshop in two halves, 2 half days, and at the end of the first day, I actually made a statement, and I basically said, I said tomorrow we are going to continue the workshop, and I want you to think about the fact that the members, right? They'll be making decisions one day whether they can afford to have milk with their bread at breakfast or not, and it'll be largely based on the decisions people around this table make. And I just made this flippant remark. I wanted people to think about this as they move forward. I think, and the next day at the beginning of the session, before the second day started, Ben came up to me and he said, "Chris, you know what you said to me yesterday? What you said to us yesterday really upset me." So I thought I had, a four-letter word had slipped through on the workshop or something. And I said, "What did I say, Ben, that kind of, upset you?" He said, "When you said, the decisions that our members will make in terms of what they have for breakfast will be determined by us," he said, "it really hit me in terms of how important our role is in the lives of our members going forward." And I go, "Oh, phew, that's what it was." But the great thing about it was that people understood the gravity of what they were doing. It gave them a sense of meaning, especially as far as Ben was concerned. The importance of his role and all, it became purposeful and meaningful, if that made sense. And the second thing I'll tell you is that, and you have to give Bart credit for this, because Bart came in as the marketing manager, but came in after the workshop. And when he came after the workshop, I was a bit worried, honestly, because I thought, here's now a marketing person. He's going to look at our brand workshop and make all his changes, but he didn't. He just embraced everything and he ran with it. And then your positioning line became right beside you. So you have to give Bart credit for that. Once you have your strategic intentions, you have to be very careful because they could just hang on a wall somewhere, right? Or be in some document. So you've got to operationalize it. So, and I believe to make NPS really work, you've got to have engagement at all levels, So, you know, if you really want transformation, it has to be embedded at multiple levels, like at a board level, at a functional level. So your CSMs and your relationship managers and your call center people and so on and so forth, right? So can you share with our audience how, the NPS program was embedded into Club Super
yeah, yeah.
at the
So,
various levels?
yeah, one of my fonder memories at the start of our relationship, I remember, I think it may have even been before we formally engaged you, that you were already interviewing our CSMs, our client service managers. They might be right or wrong, but it was very early on in the process anyway. And so I think at the start you were engaging in a process of research.
Mm,
And
mm,
and I think after the question there, or after the interviews that you had with our three client service managers, you came back to me and said that you've got some loose cannons there. And I thought it
mm,
was a figure of speech, but that was
mm,
a label that you'd given them. And meaning that they're highly motivated, highly energetic,
mm,
um, doing everything for all the right reasons, very competent, but lacking in direction.
mm,
They all went out there and did their own thing.
mm,
So that firstly gave me a good bit of feedback as to what was actually going on out there.
mm,
Um, so you'd, I guess, embedded yourself in that part of the organisation.
mm,
But the other thing was that as time went on and the NPS scores came back and so on, it is very, very easy to get the results of surveys and say that that's very interesting and then move on.
mm, mm,
But you're actually a little bit painful sometimes, Chris. You're on my back about what we do next. And
mm,
the next steps were to engage our call centre, I think, in particular,
Yeah.
and our client service managers team, and also to share the results with the directors. Well, share them with everyone, really.
Yeah.
And uh, that was really helpful. I remember that you used to come to me first with the results,
Yes.
just so that we didn't feel blindsided by your presentation at the next committee, and
Yeah.
we could have to think about, well, how will we address this? What are the suggestions we'll come up with to the committee? So it was important to have you involved with the committee, with the board of directors at strategy days, and with each one of our teams. I mean, I began to think that you were working with IFAA, Chris. You were in every part of the organisation.
Applying for a job.
Yes, that's right. The education part was really important because I think you educated us on what the difference between a transactional survey was and a relationship survey,
Mm.
and
Mm.
the sorts of questions that you asked. So
Mm.
that was really important for us because even back then, people were being surveyed over and over again. And so
Yeah.
you wanted any survey to go to people. You wanted them to be good so that they completed them, but
Yeah.
you wanted to make it relevant to them.
Yes. Yes.
So
Right.
I think there's three words that could answer your original question.
Mm.
Business as usual,
Yes.
part of the process.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So I think we were at pains to actually embed it into existing processes rather than treating it like a separate project,
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
pass the
exactly.
committees and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yep.
So when you look at it, right, and sometimes it's quite funny. You make small little changes and improvements happen, and then you're not sure exactly why it happened. In your mind, what would you say were the three key success factors that drove the NPS increases?
Yeah, it's it's a challenge to bring it down to three, but I'll give it a go. The first thing that comes to mind was that it involved the entire organisation,
Yeah.
right, from call centre right through to board level, and everyone knew what was going on. We shared the feedback with everyone,
Mm,
so that kept it at front of mind for all of
mm,
our
mm,
staff, and it stopped us from slipping back to just our normal way of doing business.
mm.
Um, there was, yeah, well, as I say, that feedback was probably the second thing. The entire organisation sharing feedback and having the support of the directors.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
was really important. I suspect that there are probably boards of directors out there that take the results from the NPS surveys um, and not really understand what they're looking at and sort of just take it as a sort of a little bit of feedback.
Yeah.
But these guys were right behind it. They
Mm.
were encouraging and they devoted the resources to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, involvement right across. That's the
Right.
main
Right.
thing.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because I remember I used to present to the marketing committee first, then I used to
Mm,
present at the board. So it was like multiple, like first to you and your team,
mm,
then it was the marketing committee, then it was the board. So it
mm.
was just this constant, but they were always very supportive. It's like they got it. And
Well,
I,
yep. I think when you were presenting to the board and management, well, in fact, the whole organisation, I think the thing was that you explained what NPS actually was.
yes,
Um, the perception is that NPS is a sort of a survey,
yeah,
and you are asked if you'd recommend services to someone else, and that's
yeah,
about it. They
yeah,
don't really get a grasp on the how things are rated, what a seven means, what a nine means, and especially what to do with those results. So
mm.
they, until you came along, they didn't really understand NPS.
Yeah. Look, as far as I'm concerned, NPS is an exercise in organizational transformation so that
Hmm.
it's more customer centric. If you treat it like anything else, like when we see people who treat it like a survey or a score, there's no progress. You have to
Hmm.
look at it in terms of saying, what is the customer saying and what can we do with it? How can we make the business better? Either we find out what's wrong or we find out what we're doing really well and let's just share best practice. It's interesting actually when you talk about the client service managers. I know each one of them were very skillful in different aspects. But then one of the things we did is we said, "Hey, you're really good at investments. You're really good at insurance. You're really good at, getting them to fill that nomination form. Why don't you share best practice? And then all of you will become better.
Mm.
And that was a good example of that. So talking about NPS being a discipline, it's best practice with NPS, as you know, that if someone is a detractor, right, you call them back, right? Straight away, because you want to understand exactly what went wrong, and you don't want like a rotten apple in the mix, right? Because they can spread negative word of mouth about you, they'll be less loyal, etc. So
Mm.
it's best practice that you call them back. So we used to send you alerts for members that were unhappy, and you could talk to them and neutralize them in the nicest possible way, right?
Mm.
Now, in addition to that, we also send you alerts around people who had funds in multiple superannuation funds, which is quite common, and whether they were interested in consolidating those funds. And finally, even people who didn't know enough about your pension products and wanted to know more. So we send all those alerts through. So it kind of became more than just a survey. It became a way to canvas for people who needed information. How useful was all this in terms of the overall picture?
Well, that was one of the extraordinarily useful things. Getting alerts about who our detractors were, because when you contacted them, you get information that you just didn't expect to receive.
Mm,
Um, I think there's probably a little bit of a misconception about detractors. Detractors don't necessarily mean enemies.
yes.
Detractors are just people that haven't referred you or wouldn't refer you to
Yeah.
another organisation. And that doesn't necessarily mean because they mean you're rubbish.
Yes.
It could just mean that they don't know enough about you to
Yes.
and when you call them and they say, well, nothing against you, I just don't know anything about you. Well,
Yeah.
that's something that's actionable
That's
itself.
an opportunity.
Well, yeah, that's right, and you're right. It also opens up a conversation,
Yeah.
about their super as well.
Yeah.
So that was really, I really actually look forward to getting the feedback about what those detractors were saying because, and you have to, um, I guess, be a little bit sort of be aware that because one person has something bad to say about you, doesn't mean that the whole
You
organisation's
are bad.
rubbish.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Because one person, it's a little bit of a fallacy to be taking one person's feedback and making a broad generalization about it. So, yeah, just sort of being careful about how you interpret results, by
Yeah.
email, and
Yeah.
then when you contact them, then you really find out some gems of
What the real issue is. Yeah.
exactly. Yep.
And the alerts that went out, I think those went to the client service managers around people who had funds elsewhere and were quite happy to talk to you about consolidating them.
Mm.
Those were useful as well.
Oh, absolutely. So we need to be careful. We weren't able to, because the regulations were such that you can't give financial
Advice.
advice to
Yeah.
people. But just the information that they had funds in other places, it gave you information on how many of your members have funds elsewhere, and you could shape your education around the good idea to consolidate your super.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
to focus them on how that fund is performing compared to how Club
Yeah.
Super is performing. So
Yeah.
yeah, all sorts of avenues, all sorts of
Yeah, I
things.
think I think I think from memory we used to send those to the financial planners actually. I
Yeah,
think, yeah.
yeah,
Because
that's
of
right.
that advice bit.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yep, yep, exactly.
So in terms of your NPS increases which happened over time, I know probably one of the best compliments you got was from one of your key competitors who will remain nameless, but he basically said, we can more than match them in terms of product range, marketing expenditure, etc., but we just can't match their customer experience, right?
Mm.
um, So, given that, and given your NPS increases, did you see a link between your NPS increases and economic performance metrics such as loyalty, roll-ins, rollouts, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So part, I guess, of the strategy or the monitoring of the strategy is to try and link, your NPS performance with your business performance.
Mm,
So we could see, and I can't remember the exact figures, but there was this correlation between between the increases in the NPS
mm,
and funds retained within Club Super. So,
right.
in other words, when people left the club industry and they
Yeah,
went to wherever else, they asked their new employer to keep
they
contributing to
took
Club
it with
Super.
them.
Yep. So that was a correlation. The other
Mm,
thing is that the nature of superannuation, we had two groups of clients really. We had members of super funds, and we
mm-hmm,
had employers who we also
mm-hmm.
saw as clients. So
Yeah,
we used to perform NPS surveys on employers, and I guess the challenge back in those days was to convince employers to make the super fund their default option. So in
yeah,
other words, if people started work with this employer, they didn't tell their employer where they're going, what their super to go,
yeah,
they would need to select a fund. So the battleground was to convince employers that your super fund or club super is a good enough fund for them to use as default option.
yeah.
So um, our NPS for employers that increased over time as well. And we could see a correlation between that and the number of employers that chose Club Super as their default fund.
Absolutely. No, that's good stuff.
Hmm.
So, Michael, given your experience in terms of achieving NPS scores, getting different levels of the organizations engaged, embedding it into the whole organization, and so on and so forth, what advice would you give a CEO that is just embarking on a program, just starting off?
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of things. So, firstly, commit. Don't do it half-hearted. Don't sort of, this is a couple of things not to do. So, um, don't just do the survey, get the results, and then carry on with life as usual.
Mm,
Um, don't, and here's another don't feel threatened by the process.
yeah,
You will more than likely get feedback that you don't particularly like.
yeah,
But I remember you shared the story about Bart, our
yeah,
marketing manager. To
yeah,
his credit, he didn't see you as a threat.
yes, yes,
Back in those days, Chris, your organisation was called Engaged Marketing, and we
yes,
engaged a marketer to help us.
yes,
And
yes,
so Bart embraced it and he worked with you. I mean, he provided his input. He didn't hold back on what his thoughts were,
yeah,
but he embraced it. So I'd suggest that with any CEO. Don't do it half-hearted. Embrace it. Don't feel threatened, and be enthusiastic about it because
yeah,
your enthusiasm, spreads through the organisation. If you
yeah,
give the impression that you're doing this as a sort of a thing that you've got to do, well, you've got to survey
yeah,
your customers.
yeah.
This is what we're doing. Embrace it as something more than a survey.
Yeah, Bart was amazing. In fact, he did a testimonial for me once and he said, I'm an NPS fan.
Way to go, Bart. Yeah. The just while I think of it, the other thing though is that this will vary from organisation to organisation depending on size, but don't be afraid to get some outside help
Yes,
because someone independent. And I hope this doesn't sound like a plug for you, Chris, but big organisations they have their own marketing resources, and
mm,
they've probably got the resources to do NPS on their own. But
mm,
it's still worth getting an outside eye to at least help them out with constructing their questionnaires.
mm,
From within the organisation, you oftentimes can't see the big picture.
mm,
You frame your questions, according to your understanding of the world or to your worldview.
mm,
And it's
mm,
an enormous help to have someone from outside the organisation, even outside the industry,
mm,
to come in and help with whatever you need help with. That could be as much as actually as we did give you the whole process to go with. You know,
Yeah.
you surveyed our members, and the
Yeah.
results went to you rather than to us.
Mm,
So that's one extreme. Big organisations may not want to go that far, but
mm, mm,
at least have someone from outside the organisation help them with the implementation or the interpretation of NPS.
mm. Look, I have to tell you, if I look at all the clients you've had over the years, right? There are some clients that are do-it-yourself type clients, and they want to do everything themselves. And then there are some clients who literally take us into the tent, right?
Hmm.
The ones who take us into the tent, all of them increase their NPS guaranteed, right? The ones who try to do it themselves, their success rate is like 15 to 20%, right?
Hmm.
And the reason for that is they underestimate it because at the end of the day, wherever you are in your journey, you have to go from there to be worthy of recommendation, right? And to be worthy of recommendation, you can't just say, I'll fix the call center, but I won't worry about the client service managers. A promoter is someone who says good things about everything. So it is an exercise in organizational transformation. And hence, it goes beyond just doing a survey and it goes beyond just examining the results. It comes down to action. But then when you take action, you've got to take action, strategically and tactically, and you have got to get everyone involved. So, for example, with Club Super as an example, there were contact center people that were doing speed ideation sessions in terms of how they can improve the experience. But then around the executive table, there were people saying, what are the systemic and organization wide issues that we need to address? So at both levels, you have to take action.
Hmm.
And I have to say that at the end of the day, from an external perspective, again, having dealt with all sorts of clients and all types of industries, the one defining factor for Club Super, and the same thing goes for Quick Super as well, was the fact that I presented results at the marketing committee. I presented results at the board meeting, and the recommendations were minuted.
Hmm.
Once they were minuted, then you knew it had to happen because it had to be reported again. So, if I was to say what is the one defining factor, it was that. It was not just sometimes organizations look at it in terms of, oh, yeah, we should do that, but we should do it one day, or
Hmm.
someday. And it never gets done. But here, what happened is, because the board supported it, but plus it was minuted, it was the
Yeah.
recommendation of minute. And I think that was the defining you know,
Yeah.
secret sauce.
They were minuted and they were added to our action items. So at the next marketing committee, you go back over the action items and
You
you're
have to
accountable
report.
for progress and so on.
Yeah,
So yes, once they're minuted, they're very difficult to forget about. So yeah.
exactly. So, so here's a tricky kind of question. Is like, supposing you have a CEO who has embarked on a program and is not getting the results they hope for, right?
Mhm.
What advice would you give them? Like, what should they look at?
Yeah.
First, second, third.
Yeah, it's probably not too radical a bit of advice, but to go beyond the scores or beyond the results and drill down into what your NPS results are telling you. I think from memory, the questionnaires that you designed, Chris, they had one question and then they had little sub questions underneath them,
Sure.
depending on what your response was. So, so just as an example, I suppose, if um, if your NPS score is stagnant or not improving, or if your business results aren't improving, go into the data and drill down and see
What do you have to do?
what's not working. So, as an example, I think there was a story in your book, Chris, wasn't there, about uh, a executive that took on NPS. I think he was getting okay NPS scores, but the business results were still not, you know, yeah, not that great. So he said NPS is a waste of time, so just forget the whole thing.
Yeah.
You can, um, My own experience is, just outside superannuation land. I can be very happy with the performance of staff organisations or staff call centre. They can give me, for example, an insurer can give me a detailed response on why their premiums have gone up,
Yeah.
and I can understand it, and they can do it in a very clear way, and I can be very happy with them. I'm
Yeah.
still moving insurer because their premiums are way too high.
Yeah.
So you have to drill down and find out why your business is going backwards. Because in this case, you've got great staff that are communicating well, but your
Yes.
product's the problem.
Yeah.
And
Exactly. Exactly.
conversely, you might have a fantastic product. You can say that we are better than all of our peers.
Mm.
Why is our NPS score so low?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why are
Yeah.
we losing staff? Then you'll find out more than likely that perhaps you're not communicating well enough, or there's some outside noise going on.
Yeah.
So drill down
Drill
into
down,
the.
exactly. So
Mm,
it's interesting you mentioned those three comments, right? So we ask the NPS question, and then what we do is, if the score is high, so you're a promoter, we would ask something like, if you had to describe Club Super to someone else, what would you say? And that gives us, like, what is driving advocacy? Like, what are you doing that's driving advocacy? Now, if someone was a passive, so they gave you a 7 or 8, so they think you're good, just not great, then with them we would say if there was one thing we could do to get a 9 or 10, what would that be? So that gives you your insight in terms of what will it take to go from being good to great. What are those little moments of wonder, and that informed that bit. But when it came to detractors 0 to 6, they typically have issues with you. So with them the question was very simple: tell me the reason for your score, and they would wax lyrical about
it's-
what they didn't like. So the
mm,
interesting thing is each segment would provide different strategic insight. Like promoters would tell you what you're doing really well, and what you should share best practice. Passives told you, what is the 1 or 2 things we need to do to go from being good to great, and detractors told you what was wrong. So each of these gave you different forms of insight to build a stronger and better business. But the other thing I was going to say as well is we used to also do these driver charts, if you remember, right? And that was based on correlation, and rather than just saying, oh, your score is 6, or you improve it, or your score is 7, or your score is 8, we would actually use correlation to actually work out what is having the biggest impact. What will give you best bang for buck. In your example around product versus contact center, we would tell you, look, focus on the contact center, that's a bigger issue right now, and maybe you can look at products later. So that form of drill down, where the analytics is very strategic and informs you in terms of what you should focus on first, second, third, is critical as well. So there you go. This is just bringing back a lot of memories for you, huh, Michael?
it is, yes, a lot of fun memories. Yep, yeah.
No worries. Sounds good. Any final thoughts for our viewers?
Yeah, look, just as a sort of, I know I made the point a little bit earlier on, but if you're looking at implementing an NPS type system, embrace it. Approach it with an open mind. Embrace it. Take it on with enthusiasm. Embed it in your organisation as business as usual,
Mm.
and enjoy the ride.
The important thing is to look at it strategically, objectively, but also qualitatively, to get the
Yeah,
best for buck.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Everyone's got their own sort of marking criteria or their own marking standard, but once you start with the NPS score, the initial score isn't as important as the trend afterwards.
Correct, correct. It's
And
what movement you're making and how you're moving forward.
mm, yeah,
Cool. Sounds
mm,
good. So,
mm.
Michael, thank you very much for your time, and hope the trip down memory lane was interesting.
Oh, they were
Um,
good. Thanks for having me on. Had a good time.
no worries, no worries. So, to all our listeners out there, thank you, Michael, and we look forward to seeing you at the next episode, where we will shine the spotlight on another business leader who's achieved amazing results. Thank you, Michael, again.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
Bye.